If you were to read the headlines coming from certain parts of the world, you'd be forgiven for thinking that diversity, equity and inclusion, DEI, is under threat and could potentially die. My guest today on the Mental Space is someone that passionately believes, though, that diversity, equity and inclusion really is the secret sauce for organisations to unlock productivity and profitability, particularly in this region. Please welcome to the Mental Space podcast, Sarah Christensen, founder of Christensen Consultancy, a chartered psychologist and a judge for the Mental Awards in 2024. And we're definitely going to press gang you in 2025. Sarah, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much, Scott. Delighted to be here today.
We always have a question that we start on, which is, what does mental health mean to you? Or indeed, how is your mental health today? So how is your mental health today?
Great question. I think I probably started off the day a little bit frazzled because I've literally just come from delivering a session to some senior leaders, which was great. I think when you're talking about mental health, diversity and inclusion, it's a real privilege to get into that workspace with the senior leaders and have that opportunity to share that. So we had a great session, thankfully. And one of the things we were doing actually was looking at the different hats we wear in a day. And if I look at the different hats that I've been wearing already this morning, I've been child wake-up alarm, snack distributor, dog walker, slightly frazzled presenter, and driver coming down Shakeside Road today was a little bit hairy on some occasions as well. So now I'm just going to come to be zen and present and enjoy my experience with you today.
My wife would say with my hairline I should be wearing hats, but I've never found one that doesn't make me look stupid. Okay, so we'll open the conversation talking about DE&I, diversity, equity and inclusion. Under threat in certain parts of the world, let's say it's the US in particular, that's kind of leading this row back from what felt like progress. How are you feeling about the narrative around DE&I currently?
Look, if I look at where DEI is in the US, do you know what? I do actually believe it needs a shake-up, if I'm honest about it. I feel that particularly in that space, it's become very divisive. It's very much around you can only get this job or this opportunity if you are X, Y, and Z. As a result, then you're creating that narrative around certain roles, certain opportunities are only for certain people, which then creates this them or us connection. And as a result, that divisiveness has been driving a lot of animosity and ill will and cultures, which is actually not very healthy. And we're seeing some of that now, the backlash of that. Things like Mark Zuckerberg, we're seeing a lot more kind of that, draw to aggression and I am going to stand up for my kind of male instincts. It's now I have to be male versus I have to be female. Like there's something wrong with being either one of them. So, I think maybe the shake-up is a good thing.
I mean, it's a fascinating point you make. The diversity in itself is becoming diversive. I can't even say it. Divisive. Thank you. I'm glad you're here. This is why we have experts on the podcast. But it's almost like the D is outsized. And if it's just that, then where is the room for the equity, which is supposed to be about equal access for all, not just the people who have been welcomed into the tent? Yeah. And then where is the inclusion and the psychological safety? And that's increasingly important in organizations. So you're feeling that, somehow we're stopping at D and not moving into E and I, and thus negating the entire process.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point to make, is that particularly in the US, it has been very focused on the D. And I think we need to move past that. And certainly a lot of the work that I do is not talking very much around D. It's about what do we need to do to create consciously inclusive cultures where everyone has the opportunity to thrive? What do we need to do to make sure people feel valued, that everyone feels that they contribute, that they can have this sense of belonging to bring their best selves to work ultimately? Because when we do, that's when everyone wins, not just business, but individuals, the country, the world wins.
Yeah. So how do we move beyond? I mean, as you quite rightly said, it almost feels like the D is being weaponized by all manner of people. let alone that noted humanitarian Mark Zuckerberg calling for more male attitudes and aggression in workplaces. Not sure I entirely agree with him, but it's been weaponized. It's polarizing people. How do we move from, well, diversity is a good thing. Bringing different perspectives into an organization should be healthy for an organization. But where is it going wrong in terms of moving down the chain to the E and to the I? And the risk of not moving beyond the D, but also the benefits of that if we can bring these diverse people into the business, but then make them feel like they have equal opportunities, they have that equity that we talk about and the inclusive culture that you talk about. What's the benefit of getting that right?
Like, I think there is still a lot of narrative out there that DEI is this some fluffy HR stuff that we have to do. It's the cupcakes during International Women's Day, and and okay, great, wonderful, but let's move past that narrative. So I think really understanding, and we're getting there to some degree, the business case behind change. Now, thinking about the business case, there is so much research out there now about what benefits that brings. It brings innovation, your abilities to attract and retain the right talent. It means understanding your kind of customer base. When you have diversity within your organization, you absolutely can have so much more of that, and your understanding of your products, your services, in order to achieve business success, are absolutely there. But that is not where we need to stop. We need to be able to, yes, have that diverse group of people around the table. But if we have that diverse group of people around the table, but only 2 of them are able to speak up, then you're not going to leverage and harness the kind of the power that exists there within that. So what organizations really need to be focusing on is, what do we need to do to create that psychologically safe, inclusive organization culture from within, where people go, I feel respected, I feel heard, I feel I can contribute, I feel I can bring my authentic self to the workplace, and I will give my authentic self and my full self and my full potential. When people feel they can do that, that's when you really leverage the power of that diversity, equity, and inclusion. And you've got to understand the mechanisms. Business needs to understand the mechanisms that in order to differentiate themselves, they need that diverse perspective, but they need to have those inclusive leaders within who are creating that culture to be able to do that, to leverage that diversity.
And to kind of harness the benefits that it could potentially bring. I've seen some research recently as well about the question of voluntary versus mandatory. And we look at the States, in many organizations, they're brought in mandatory targets or mandatory training, which seems like a way of, shortcutting through that culture change process, rather than voluntary and trying to bring people with you. Is that potentially where some of this is falling down? Because we're not taking the time to bring people with us. We're just telling people they have to do it. And then that's making people feel excluded. Absolutely.
Look, when we put anything like quotas and targets in place, they're going to create that potential, unless that potential for conflict, unless people understand why that is put in place. Now, I'm not saying quotas are right. I'm not saying quotas are wrong. There's somewhere in between. There's a grey area in between around that. But the big thing about that is understanding that what you need in the workplace to succeed is different what I need to succeed. And I think that's the power of having that inclusive culture. And I'll give you an example of this. There's a case study of a client I'm working with a while back. And again, very male-dominated industry. They were looking to bring more women in. The women who were there, they kind of recognized that they needed something different. They needed to kind of get the engagement much better up and the satisfaction level of these women up, because they weren't exactly having the easiest time in the workplace. And what do we need to do to kind of help them feel that sense of belonging and psychological safety? So when we did the research and we looked at what was going on, it's very clear that the organization was designed for men by men. And it was very much around trying to bring these women in to an equal environment where men and women were being treated equally. Now, an example of that one would be that the uniforms the females were wearing were just small sizes of the men's uniforms. And as a female, I will tell you now, that is not necessarily the most comfortable to be wearing.
Okay.
So when we actually took the time out to do small tweaks like that, provide them with the right facilities, provide them with a uniform that actually was designed to fit their bodies, not just from an equity, okay, this is a great thing we need to do for our women, but even from a safety perspective because of the industry they were in. When we actually did that, we started appreciating that women need something different in the organisation in order to give their best. And we're actually able to then, with all the different things that we were put into place, the engagement level of women then started to increase. But what was really interesting out of that case study was that when we started doing these tweaks to enhance women's experience in the workplace, actually the men started to speak up and started saying, actually, hold on a minute, I see she's doing something to, she's getting specific resources. Can I get some of this? And started asking for things that would help them do their job. So actually, when we really changed the whole narrative from being an equal organisation to an equitable organisation, wasn't just about benefiting women, it was actually about benefiting everybody with it. And from that, then we could see the enhancement and the engagement from everybody, and obviously the business success.
I think it's just worth dwelling on that for a second, because we talk about equality and equity. Perhaps there's some confusion about what equal opportunities are versus what equity is. So could you give us your definition of what equity is versus that kind of traditional idea of equality?
Yeah, a really great question. I think that's really important for people to understand the difference. So what is equality? Equality is treating everyone equally. So you and I will get exactly the same thing. So in the corporate world, we have, equal pay, we have equal opportunities, we have equal allowances, we have equal holiday allowance.
Which doesn't sound bad.
No, that sounds bad. And it's fair. Would you not agree? That's fair.
Yeah.
But does that allow us all equal opportunities to fully participate in the workplace? Not always, because what I potentially need is different to what you potentially need. And this is where we have to bring in that conversation on equity. Equity is about allocating resources based on need. So what I need as, for example, a working mum might be different to what you need as a 20-something-year-old single person having fun in Dubai.
Yeah, that's me to a T.
But it's about understanding that and realizing that each person brings something different into the workplace, and to get the best out of them, they may need certain things, whether that be resources, approaches, opportunities, to get the best out of them. And that's what organisations need to really take into consideration. Equality is fair, absolutely. So is equity. But how they view, why equality and equity are viewed very much from how diversity comes into play. So when we think about equality, diversity is blind almost. So it doesn't matter whether you're pink, purple, green or blue, we will both be treated the same. But when it comes to the equity part of it, then we need to take that diversity into play. But you've also got to understand that diversity. You've got to understand what is the lived experience of you versus me. Understanding that, understand the strengths, and be able to put into play some element of resources, approaches, strategies that will maximize my potential in the workplace.
To massively simplify, if I look to the world of sports, not everyone's a striker, not everyone's a goalkeeper, not everyone's a defender. And when you try and play someone out of position, they don't succeed. Whereas when you find the right space for them, that's when they become the superstar in the team. So ultimately simplifying massively, but is that the kind of theory in that we're just trying to find the best fit and give them what they need to succeed in that role?
Absolutely. That's the essence of it. It's like we want to maximize potential. I, as a business, want to make sure you do that for not just you as the individual, but for the team, but for the organisation. And we've got to understand what the strengths are.
So equity really is a real lever for productivity then?
Absolutely.
You remind me of your story about the uniform, though, because obviously there is that it almost feels like the mistake that organizations sometimes make is that they're trying to have this one size fits all. And I understand it from a management perspective because that's easier. One policy is easier than 15 policies. Or having to feel managers needing to understand the individual needs of their teams. If they just say, I've got one set of policies, tough. Again, we've got one uniform. So talk to me again, just a little bit of why we need to step away from one size fits all. That's no longer fit for purpose inside organizations?
No, I don't think it is. Again, let's go back to the mechanism with which businesses succeed. Businesses succeed by having that diversity. They need that diversity, but they need to be able to understand the strengths of every single person around that table.
Yeah.
What are your strengths? What do you bring to the table? What value have you got there? But without stopping and asking, tell me a little bit about you. What makes you unique? What makes you part of this conversation?
Yeah.
And unless you actually ask that question, and one of the most powerful questions I think anyone can ever ask in a workplace is, what is it that you need to succeed? And I think this is where I sometimes see managers struggling with this, because if I start having to ask everyone, then everyone's going to have something different and I just can't cope. I need that one policy that brings it all nicely together. But if you just ask, you don't need all these differences. You just need to ask that one question. What is it that you need to succeed? And by asking that and listening to that, then you can evolve that conversation. You can evolve that culture around that individual to make sure that that policy then fits in with what they need to succeed and bring that all together. So I think it is around psychological safety. It's about stopping and asking people about their lived experience.
Yeah.
So tell me about how your experience is in work. Tell me what it is your experience is at home. Understanding and connecting with people on a much deeper level to understand their sense of belonging, their sense of value, sense of worth. And by having that conversation, you are now got a massive amount of information and insight of where can I best leverage Scott, his skills, abilities, everything that he's got.
God, I'd love to know.
To make me succeed.
I mean, I was delighted to see, and it's interesting, again, there's a lot of narrative around, this woke agenda and DEI is bad for business. I've tried to do some research on this to try and find any studies that show us that actually DEI has been bad for business. I can't find a single credible one, but we can find multiple pieces of research that tells us that inclusive cultures are very, very good for business. Delighted to see this week actually where Apple have turned around and rejected calls for it to throw diversity, equity, inclusion out the window. And there's a company that's done reasonably well and innovated a certain amount. So there are great corporate case studies out there that see diversity as an opportunity. I think this part of the world has a big opportunity as well, because if we look at the economic fundamentals of this region for the next 5 to 10 years, so much opportunity for businesses, but so much need for talent. And that sometimes we forget the need that actually talent isn't something that we just bring in, burn out and throw out the window, but actually talent is something that is fundamental to the success of businesses.
Absolutely. And I think this is where the Middle East is a booming marketplace right now. It has got some amazing influx of talent, which is doing great things. So if we look at, for example, what are as a region, what are the big things, industries that are going to take off in the next couple of years? It's really around sort of like the AI, the technology, it's the healthcare, the education. There's so many big booming opportunities for different industries to grow within this region. And I think because we've got people from every walk of life coming into Dubai, and from Dubai, it's such a cosmopolitan hotspot, which is phenomenal, that we can leverage all that diversity to really kind of harness and grow all those different businesses. What's interesting as well, particularly around the technology sphere, obviously technology being a big thing within the UAE even.
Yeah, absolutely.
AI, technology, literate, all that. 61% of STEM graduates coming out of university in the UAE are women. there is a phenomenal opportunity to be able to bring that gender equality back into the workplace, particularly for industries like STEM. And bringing women into that narrative. And, I hear that, but where are all the talent coming from? I can't find any talent. There's loads of talent out there. You're just not looking for it. The biggest thing that's holding that back is the biases that people hold. It's that biases with going, when I talk about STEM, for example, what do I think? I think male engineer. Well, actually, when you look at the statistics of what's happening in the UAE, that narrative is changing.
Yeah.
And I think that's where we've got to really be challenging our biases, that when it comes to looking at talent. There is a wealth of talent out there, diverse talent ripe for the picking. But we've got to put those biases away and challenge those and mitigate those in order to really be able to harness that diverse talent.
If we step away from diversity, equity, inclusion being a gender matter for 1 second, and if we look at, again, and we talk about 5 and 10 years' time, by 10 years' time, we're going to have 4 generations of people in the workplace. So that's a different type of diversity. Yeah. But that in itself, we can see some friction happening right now, particularly, amongst the managers that look like me, to our much younger colleagues who are coming in with all of this fresh energy and deep knowledge of technology and AI, and seem like a massive seam that can be mined in terms of innovation for organizations. But there is this big friction between Gen X, boomers, and Gen Z, and even Gen Alpha that's coming along the lines. How do we, again, move beyond these barriers that we seem to be building into organizations, which don't seem to do any good for us?
Yeah, and that's really around mindsets and behaviors, isn't it? It's this knowing that, this whole idea that I'm a senior leader, I have to have all the answers. No, you don't. It's moving past this and recognizing that, do you know what? Today we have wicked problems that we have never been able to solve before, things that our clients are bringing to us, the world is throwing at us, and the solutions that we as, 40-plus-year-old experts in our field have always solved, those solutions aren't going to work anymore. And it's about being humble enough, and it's about being mindful enough to realize that you won't have the answers to this, and that you need to leverage that power of diversity through inclusive leadership by creating that psychologically safe sphere to allow everyone to feel valued and participate. It's only through that you are going to be able to create the solutions that are going to solve the biggest problems out there that we're facing.
I've sat in so many management meetings which start with the boss going, this is the problem, this is what I think.
Yeah.
As opposed to, this is the problem, what do you all think?
Absolutely.
And then sitting there and listening to the information.
Yeah.
I'm just going to change gears a little bit, because again, around this diversity, equity, inclusion and the woke agenda, that again, we've got that narrative in the US. Some of this polarization in the workplace, it seems to run along the male-female lines, in that there are men who are complaining about the woke agenda. But what's your feeling about men in the workplace? Because we quite rightly look at the gender inequity, and I'm a father of a young girl. By the time she reaches the workplace, I would love the workplace to be equitable, so she's got a fair shot. But for women to rise, that doesn't necessarily mean that men have to fail, but that's sometimes how it's being painted. What's your view of that?
Yeah, I think if we look at what the research says right now, the gender, there is around the gender gap is flipping. So whereas historically we would have always seen women as the ones who need supporting, need being brought up, we're now seeing women thriving massively. Particularly when it comes to the workplace. And there's multiple reasons for that. I think the education available to women now for the last numbers or 2-3 decades, women have had that opportunity. That's where the gender equality has come into play. Yeah. Women have now had access to that education, that healthcare, those things that are going to allow them to enter into the workplace in the first place. What we've also seen is a shift in the type of work that is available out there. We are seeing less of the kind of manufacturing, the construction, that kind of type of work, which would have historically been male dominated.
Yeah.
And we're seeing that increase in things like healthcare, in education, in the service industries, which, given the skills, the characteristics, the traits, a lot of that is quite naturally aligned to how women are. When we think about it, women are much more around people, men are much more about things and doing things. And that's a broad sweeping statement. Obviously, there's a big overlap in a lot of these things. So I think from that side of things, the dynamics of the workplace has changed. What we're seeing from the research is that men have been slower to upskill and change and pivot as a result of the shift in the workplace landscape. Yeah. Women have just been thriving. If we look, and there's a PwC research paper done 2 years ago, and they were just like, women are confident, they're ambitious, they are driven. They want to succeed, not just to have financial independence themselves, but because they want to be role models for their daughters, for the other women. So I think it has come around where women have absolutely leveraged all the opportunities they have, and they are absolutely thriving now. That does not mean that there is no place for men. But what we're seeing is that what it means to be male today, that whole social narrative and that definition of masculinity is evolving and it's changing. And where we're seeing that sticking point is that men are not evolving with that. Because if we think about, historically speaking, what does it mean to be a man? To be a man means procreator, protector, provider. I am the breadwinner. I will go out to work and I will provide for my family and I will come back and I will look after you, etc. What we're seeing at the rise of women, particularly in the workplace, is that they're now being the provider and the protector, because they now have the financial means, the intellectual means to be able to do that. So there's almost like the two of the three components of what it means to be male is kind of absolving a little bit. And as a result, what we're seeing within sort of some of the broader context, particularly places like the US and the UK, is men are falling behind, both in the workplace, but also in society. We're seeing increased risks of mental health, particularly in men. And I know we've talked about that before. We're seeing, I was looking at a statistic recently. I think the workplace now has gone from men, 67% of the US are male in the workplace. It's dropping down. It was previously something like 85. It's now gone down to 67 because they are becoming quite disillusioned with their feeling that, these women are taking my jobs.
Is it, though, that women are taking their jobs? Or have we got... Is it kind of like a bit of a perfect storm? Because there's more than one thing going on here, in that we've got women who have been held back educationally for so long that are coming out of the gate with this massive burst of energy because it's an opportunity that's been denied for them for so long. So they're streaming ahead. And in any industry, we see it. If we were to talk about not human, but industries where you have a legacy industry, you have the existing situation, and then the disruptor comes in. The fact that women have now got this access to education that they, over the past 30 years that they didn't have previously, that's itself a disruptor. And actually the men aren't reacting to that. As you say, you use the words pivot, evolve. If you were in industry and you were a private corporation that didn't pivot or evolve when something new came to disrupt your market, you kind of go out of business. But then the second thing that seems to be happening is, as you talk about, the industry, the nature of work, it has changed. We're in a knowledge sector. So it's not that the fact that women are necessarily taking their jobs, it's that men haven't upskilled, as you say, in time, but also not really adapting to that kind of the change of the fact that, we do require fewer pickaxes than we used to. Now it's a much more knowledge industry, and all of the studies, PwC, McKinsey, tell us that skills like emotional intelligence and empathy are the tools that use to succeed. And we've got, I know managers my age who were promoted because they were good at a process. They're now they're in their 50s and they're terrified of today's landscape because they're not in touch with their own feelings.
Mm-mm.
They don't know how to be vulnerable. They've never needed or been trained to actually talk to individuals as individuals and understand what that other person wants. They're terrified of the landscape today because it's all about emotions and empathy rather than technical skills or physical strength.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think that's where, particularly around the work that you're doing as well, it's about bringing this concept out into the open to say to men, it's okay to be vulnerable. Mm-hmm. We have to change the language around this, and we have to change the kind of the understanding that we have for men and giving them that safe space to go, when you're not having a good day, it's okay to say you're not having a good day. Yeah. Let's talk about that.
Which is really, really not traditional for us.
It is. And I think that's why there's so many norms that need to be kind of broken down by that. And I think that's what's great about the work that you're doing is you're giving men this safe space and that platform to be able to go, it's okay not to be okay. Let's tear away that silence and let's have that conversation of what's actually going on in your head.
We see all the research as about how bad isolation is for any individual, male or female, Gen Z or Gen X. And right now it does feel like men feel very isolated because they don't know who to talk to. Yeah. And that's why we need to get people talking. We need to get men talking as well as women talking. Women almost empathically have, I think, a greater sense of community. They tend to build that community. It's not something I think that's come very naturally to men. And I think, no man is an island, as the saying goes. You talk about the work that we've been doing. You were very kindly a judge for the Mentl Awards 2024. And sometimes, again, we've been talking about this narrative. We've been talking about organisations that we feel a little bit let down by because they're conveniently stepping away from DEI in this current climate. The pendulum will swing back and it will return. But you also got access to see some of the great work that organisations were doing, and that's what the Mentl Awards is about, trying to celebrate those organisations that put their people first. What were your thoughts or feelings? What did you see? What gave you hope? Just give me your experiences from that judging process.
Well, look, I've been in the DEI space here, particularly in the Middle East, for a while now. And every year I am delighted to see that narrative evolve and move on. I think where we were compared to 10 years ago is in a great place. I see there's a lot more organisations who are not just playing lip service to it, who are genuinely committed to making a change. That's what we're talking about, the mindsets, the behaviours, the culture element of it. It's not just, let's just, throw some cupcakes out on International Women's Day and hope for the best. This is what do we need to do to make sure everyone feels included and belong. Yeah. So it's great to see kind of that cultural context happening. I think what I really enjoyed, and I always love hearing about the experiences of companies and how they create that sense of inclusion, belonging within their own context. Yeah. And that was lovely to see some great examples of that were coming through. And again, what I'm seeing from the experience I had as a judge was that it's not just about pockets of nationals or women or whatever. It's that, what do we need to do to make everyone feel this sense of inclusion? And I think that's where the conversation has evolved and was lovely to see.
I've really enjoyed working with you. We're in some organisations. Obviously, Mentl, we have this kind of fledgling workplace wellbeing consultancy, and you are one of our resident experts. And we've gone into organisations already and done workshops with those clients. Tell us a little bit about the work that you've been doing in that space, the stuff that we've been doing together.
Yeah, so look, a lot of it is around how do we create that sense of inclusion and belonging? As I said, the big thing about that is understanding that concept of equity. What is you need in order to feel belonging? Mm-hmm. And part of that is around, let's understand your mental health. Because how can I give my absolute best if I've got all these things going round in my head, whether it be neurodiversity, things going on at home, things that are happening to me, the challenges I'm going through, menopause, all sorts of stuff. And I think it's about opening up, and what we're looking to do is kind of opening up those conversations to go, it's okay not to be okay. How can we create that psychological safety and support leaders to create that psychologically safe environment to be able to have someone go, do you know what? Today is not my great day. And for a manager to go, that's okay. What do you need today to succeed? Let me help you with that, and let's see what happens tomorrow. So, yeah, I think a lot of the stuff that it's been great fun.
It has been great fun.
It has been great fun. Lots of different stories shared.
Final question. It won't be the final question because I always think of a different question. But how important is it that the UEE government is leading this kind of transformation around mental health? When we've seen the president of the UEE announced that 2025 is the year of community, incredibly important for mental health. We've seen new legislation, mental health law coming in, Dubai Health Authority, the Dubai Wealth Framework, 105 million dirhams being invested into mental health. What tone does that set for the corporate world? What's the call of action to them when we see the government setting the pace on this?
I love the fact of what the government is doing right now. When you look at other nations around the world, who's really driving this as hard and heavy as they are here? And I think hats off to the UAE government for doing that. It's a real role model for other countries. I think it's setting a real precedence to corporates to go, we're taking this seriously. Because I think for too long, corporates have gone, I'm going to squeeze every ounce out of you kind of mentality. And, when you look at the research of it, the UAE and Dubai, it has got the longest working hours, it's the most stress. And we're seeing that. But the government are now going, hold on a minute, we don't want to have that label anymore. We want to do something about it. And there are so many different avenues that this is going to help, not just for, if we talked about men, how can we create a greater community for them to feel that they belong, even if they don't have a job right now, or they're not in the traditional kind of concept as they are in. What can we do to create that community so that everyone can come together and feel valued, that it can feel included, that they contribute and they can belong. And I just love to see where this is going, because I think it's setting a really strong.
It's fascinating you bring up how hard we work here. I've been on this road show the past few weeks. It was all about the economic climate. Pop quiz. Who has the greater GDP per hour? China or the UAE?
Oh, that's an interesting one. Go on, tell me, what's the answer?
It's the UAE. Now, in terms of GDP per hour, how much better do you think the UAE is than China?
Oh, that's I don't know.
It's nearly double.
Double, wow.
Double. It's double the global average. It's double the average of the G20, and it's double China's average. So this whole idea that somehow we're not working hard enough, there's a bit more, juice to squeeze from the lemon. Yeah. It's like, we are working really, really hard in this part of the world. A question in two parts almost. What inspired you to get into this space in the first place? What's your personal journey been in this workplace? Because I imagine at times it's been a bit challenging as well. And then how have you protected yourself or looked after your mental health? Or what are the steps these days that you do to look after your mental health? If we were to give our listeners a little bit of practical advice from your experience, and the things that we tell organizations they should do, what do you do in your life? Yeah.
Okay. So in terms of my journey, you might need to repeat that question later on, but for right now, I'll start with my journey. So I started off in clinical psychology. And I guess as a natural kind of wanting to connect with humans, I was always the kid that, someone fell down and are you all right? Are you okay? What can we do? Let's take you, the nurturing kind of element of it. And I always felt very incredibly privileged to hear the stories of other people. And I've heard a lot of stories. There have been times in my journey as a psychologist where I have done whatever it has taken me not to cry in sessions with clients because their stories have touched me so deeply. But there's also the sessions that I've had clients walk out and going, that was life-changing. And that's what I do.
Yeah.
That's why I do this. When you can find someone who's going, I've touched someone in a way that has made their life better. It's that making a difference in someone's life. That is my absolute driving force behind it. And whether that's big or small, that's my main driver behind it. I moved from sort of clinical into the occupational world. I love the dynamicism of it. It's absolutely going from, there's so much you can do. And I think I really appreciate and I enjoy that. And I love the work that we can do by taking a different conversation to leaders to not only just help them to question their own mental health and their assumptions and biases around what mental health is and how their employees' mental health should be, and that whole squeezing the stone, but also just how innovative we can be when we do that. And we have great fun when we do this, and absolutely.
That felt like a mic drop moment, particularly that bit about helping people. Yeah. But how do you help yourself?
So I think for me, I need to be aware of me, and I know when my bucket is running low. And obviously as a business owner, and I know you appreciate this too, there's sometimes when you just go, the bucket's low, but I still got to keep going. And you have to find those sticky plasters along the way.
I just want a bucket.
And so it's understanding yourself and where your limits are and setting those boundaries. And I'll give you an example. The last couple of weeks, because we're in the run up to International Women's Day, I've been working with clients nonstop for the last 2 weeks. It's been hardcore going, session after session. I haven't had a lot of downtime, even personally, to spend with my family. Yeah. And I got to the stage on Friday and I was like, my bucket's empty. And I've still got this, and that I need to do. And I said, I know I cannot be effective at doing that. I have to put down the laptop, I have to close the office door, and I need to go away and do the things that are meaningful for me. So that is taking the dogs for a walk. That means going up for a hike up the mountains. That means going and, chatting with friends.
Cycling 97 kilometers.
And cycling 97 kilometers for those of us who can do these sorts of things. And
some of us can't.
It's all right. I can take you out next Saturday, Scott. No problem at all. So I think it's finding and knowing and having those things in your life that fill your bucket up again. And is my bucket still, full again after the last couple of weeks? Not quite, but I still feel I can function now. And I know that over the next wee while, it's about keep topping that up. But it's that mindfulness, that presence that I'm aware of, and just making sure that I'm consistently giving myself something back again.
Amazing. That is a mic drop moment. Well, I hope your bucket's a little fuller from this conversation. Remember, if you've enjoyed this conversation half as much as I've enjoyed it, please subscribe. If you're watching us on YouTube, the button is right there. Just press it. It takes you literally 5 seconds, but it helps us bring on more amazing guests like Sarah Christensen. Sarah, thank you so much for joining us on the Mental Space podcast today.
Thank you very much, Scott. It's been a pleasure.